Alright, welcome to another video, and before we get started I'd like to take a quick minute to thank all the Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members whose names you see scrolling across the screen right now. They make this financially possible, and without you, I probably wouldn't be here making videos, so thank you. Alright, so in today's video we're going to be taking a close look at the T1 Ranger, and I'll just kind of show you some of the things I've changed in it. It makes this one a little bit unique, or different from stock anyway. I think they're all kind of unique to some degree. But anyway, it's kind of just an updated look at some of the changes I made since I did the last video like this one. Most notably, we've put walk snail in it. We're kind of going to start from the front, work our way to the back. And hopefully I cover everything. Like I said, the most notable change is walk snail. I have the Pro camera up here, which is with the V2 transmitter. Transmitter is actually down in here. And you see we have the single antenna. I'm using the Cadex branded Rush FPV Cherry. It's a Rush FPV Cherry that's made by, well, it's made for Cadex by Rush FPV, as you can see there. Those tend to work pretty good. I kind of prefer the HGL RC hammers as far as low cost, good performing antennas go. But I had a couple of these on hand that I'd replaced from other airplanes, so I just went ahead and used it to work well. Obviously it's going to be left-hand circular polarized, work with my VRX. I'm using the built-in patch antennas on the video receiver, and on the top two connectors I'm using the, I think they're like 9 dB, 8.5, something like that, the smaller triple feet patch antennas. So focusing on the airplane though, like I said, we'll start at the front. You can see this little printed piece right in here. It's 3D printed with PETG material. And you just kind of cut out the foam where the analog camera would normally go, and that piece slides in there and serves as an air intake. And you can see my walk snail V2 transmitter is mounted inside, and that just kind of friction fits in from the front, or it'll also slide out of the back into the fuselage. And my pan servo is just kind of sitting in here. This is a different one. This is a 300-degree servo, if I remember right. That's trying out. I normally use the 270s. This one's marked at 300 degrees, and it does work pretty well. It's pretty interesting design. It's a plastic output gear, but there is a little clutch mechanism inside that kind of prevents you from being able to strip the servo. But it still does, even when the clutch slips, it doesn't change the output. It still centers and positions itself correctly. But that's just kind of sitting down there. I cut out a little bit of foam so it can kind of sit in place, and have this little filler piece kind of printed that sits around the servo, and also has a little notch right there for the camera cable to come up through. You can ignore this little hex-shaped piece. This is where I actually had an SMA antenna before for my analog video. It was kind of glued down in the foam there. Once I pulled that out, I just kind of printed a little filler just to cover that hole. But you can see I have my camera cable situated so that there's a little loop in the top with just enough clearance to clear the antenna so it doesn't catch on it when panning left and right. And there's enough cable here that when you pan all the way left or right, you can see the cable just kind of wraps around under the servo there, and there's still plenty of cable in the loop there so that nothing binds up or anything. And it was kind of an accident. I didn't really plan it this way, but if you notice, when you pan all the way, the antenna ends up sitting right next to the camera lens. You can see it's kind of on the side of it, and it's totally invisible to the camera. You never see the antenna in the camera when you're flying and panning the camera around. So it kind of almost works like the invisible selfie stick on the 360 cameras. Is kind of what I related to. Happy accident, but it works well. So I'll take it. I'll claim it. But anyway, that's why you don't see my antenna in the videos when I pan behind and look behind you. And when you're looking back, with the angle that you can get out of this servo, it'll stop with the lens almost touching the antenna. I mean, there's only like 1 millimeter or 2 clearance between the antenna post and the side of the lens. But coupled with that and the wide angle that you get from the lens on these cameras, you can actually see pretty well straight behind you. I mean, you can, when you pan over to the right, you can actually see way out to the left behind the airplane. So it's a nice overall setup. It all works well together. So moving back, before we get into the fuselage, moving back, see I'm running these 3D printed mounts. These are from Printables. It was a design that was put up on RC Group's I think it originally came from someone in the Telegram group somewhere, if I remember right. There's credit given to the original person that designed the mount before they ended up on printables at the printables link that I'll send you to. Like I said, these are not my files. I just downloaded and printed them, and they work really well, and I like them. Only change I made, the M2 screws that go through the wings, they on the link they specify that you can use a 15mm screw, and that's what these are, is 15mm M2 screws. But the way the files came straight from printables, the 15mm screws were too short. And what I mean by that, you see you have a nut down on the bottom side of the mount here. You see mine are pretty recessed into the mounts. That's a change I made. I had to sink those mounts quite a bit, or those nuts down into the mount quite a bit further than the way the files came. If you have longer M2 screws, they should work. Maybe 20 or 25mm. I'm not sure what they actually need, but the 15mm that they call for is incorrect. And I was able to modify the files and sink those screws deeper to work with the 15mm screws that I had on hand. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to print them, you're going to need longer than 15mm screws. I'm not exactly sure how long. Or maybe I might upload these somewhere if someone really needs to print them for 15mm screws, then you don't want to bother modifying the files. I've already done it. I'll make those available if someone asks. The reason I printed these, I still have my stock mounts right over here. These are the stock motor mounts that came with the airplane, and they are known to fail. Mine are some of the earlier mounts. They did update these and added a little fiberglass backing. You see, neither one of these actually failed completely. But let me see if I hold these up to a light, shine a light through it if my camera wants to focus. You can see the cracks are forming in them, and it was just going to be a matter of time before they failed. That's one. We'll take a look at the other one here. Yeah, this has more cracks than the first one. Yeah, you can see they were well on the way to failing. It was just a matter of time. So I went ahead and replaced those with the printed mounts. And again, these are printed in PETG. And they're working really well for me and having no issues. And they look nice too, especially printed in the gray PETG to match the plane. I kind of like the look. It's all the same. All the parts on here are the same PETG, with the exception of some inside. But this is some cool gray from... I forget who makes it. It's a place in Texas. I'll put the name on screen. It's I actually have a box. Ziltech. That's them. Ziltech. I had to look back there and see. But yeah, there's some Ziltech Cool Gray PETG is what kind of... It's a little bit lighter color than the foam on the plane, but I like the look overall. So let's see. More printed parts. These are the air exhausts that I mentioned in my last video, the one that I posted a couple of days ago. This is the stock. I think it's intended for the GPS, the way the airplane comes. Now my GPS is mounted inside under this hatch. We'll take a look at that in a bit. But I put this little air exit. This one actually lets more air flow through it. It's lifted a little higher than the stock piece. And you can see that it's kind of open and lets more air flow through it. And I also added another one, just like the same printed piece. I just cut another hole out. I actually used this piece as a template to shape that hole and cut it out just so that I have two air exhausts. And the reason for that is with this rather large air intake, which is, I mean, you don't really need this much cooling, but I just kind of designed it to fit the transmitter, to physically fit it with a little bit of airflow around it. And the way it's just kind of ramming air into the fuselage up here, right up on the front of the nose like that, it was causing a high static pressure inside the fuselage, which was affecting my barometer, and it was throwing my altitude off a bit. So I added these two air exhausts back here to get air out faster. I just had one back here, the little stock piece, initially, that let some airflow through, and it was enough to keep everything cool, but like I said, it caused a higher pressure in the fuselage with the large air intake on the front and not enough air exhaust. So by adding a larger one here and a second one here, it took care of the problem. So you'll notice I have a different canopy lock mechanism here. The original one that snaps onto the spar worked fine. I actually prefer that to this. But the original one did break, and it was my fault. I had the hatches in place, and I went to slide the spar through the fuselage and wasn't thinking about the little catch sitting down in there, and I caught it with the spar and broke it. So that was my fault. And I found this file. Again, this is not my design, this is one that I found. You just kind of turn this little piece up here, it's just kind of a snug fit on the screw. You turn that and it will allow you to lift the canopy off of it. And you see it's just kind of snapped onto the spar there, and has the little locking piece up here in the top. Just kind of turn it to lock it, or crossways to let it out. So another printed part before we get too far ahead of it is my battery tray, which is a little bit difficult to see down in there, but it just kind of bolts to the rails using 8 of the provided screws. And it's sized just right for this little 18650 pack that I have in here. It's a 3000 AU line pack, and there's a little ledge on the back and one on the front that keeps the battery from moving front to back. And the strap has a slot to go through it using the stock heat-wing strap that comes with the airplane kit, and it goes through a slot and it keeps the battery located sides and obviously up and down, so the batteries can't really move anywhere. They're kind of fixed in place, and if you need to adjust the center of gravity, you just pull those screws out, move it front or back on the rails, and use different screw holes. Now mine is as far back as I can comfortably get it, because my flight controller is right there next to the battery. Now I do have a bit more room under here. I could probably move my flight controller back a bit further in the back if I really needed to get more weight in the back. But it all worked out like this, so I just kind of left it at that. And before we get too far ahead, once again, if we spin the airplane around, we get a little light shining in here. You can see the back of that 3D printed piece with the back of my video transmitter kind of sitting right down in there, and all the cables to the pen servo and the transmitter run underneath the battery tray and come out back here and go up to the flight controller. So it makes a nice clean setup inside. Pick up my hatches that I dropped on the floor there. No changes in the front one other than a little notch that I cut out for when I had the in-log video in there, but that's actually not necessary anymore. So I was able to keep the video transmitter far enough forward that it doesn't interfere with the hatch, and that's why it's kind of just right behind that little printed piece. And by the way, that antenna is just kind of stuck through there. Like I said, it's the Caddx branded RushFPV Cherry. This is the longer one of the options that they sell. And I just have a little dab of hot glue to keep it there. I just kind of poked a hole through the foam and slipped the antenna through it. And the hot glue just kind of keeps the post located up and down so it doesn't slide. I have it just high enough so that the antenna is above the camera and kind of gets a clear view around it. And the rest of that post is kind of pushed down in the fuselage. So that's the front hatch. The rear hatch, like I said, I just kind of added this little air exit. And you see under the bottom there, I cut out some of the foam in this area right here. I just kind of cleared out some of that foam to give it a little bit straighter shot out that way so the airflow is a little bit better. And there's also a little notch cut out right here, this spot, and that's to clear the buzzer on the remote USB board. And this little tray is the same one that I showed in the last video. I've been using this since the start. It just kind of spar slips through it, and it kind of snaps down in the back of the fuselage there, and it's free to fold it up to give you access to the top of the flight controller should you need to get to the SD card or anything like that down in there. It just kind of sits back in here, and the hatch holds it down. And the USB port is accessible right there, as well as the buzzer is up here, and that's also where I have my GPS. I'm using the Walksnail GPS. This is the M10 unit, the only one Walksnail sells. I think it's a WS181 or something like that, but I'm not sure. I'll have a link to it below the video. I'm going to have a link to many of the things that I'm using in here, and there are going to be affiliate links. It won't cost you anything for using them, but I will get a little bit of kickback, so keep that in mind. But yeah, the rear hatch just kind of sits there, and like I said, that little notch that I showed you is just to clear the buzzer, and the other one where I cut out the foam is just for added airflow through the new exit that we added. So that's that. Crossfire receiver is just kind of dangling in here on the wires. Trying to do this one-handed, excuse me, things are a little bit hard to do there. But yeah, you see the crossfire receiver is just kind of sitting right down there. There's not glued in place or anything, it's just kind of hanging on the wires. And you notice I did originally have a crossfire antenna glued out here. That's why the foam is kind of cut out, notched out right there. I had the antenna ended right here, the stock length one, and the elements just kind of ran vertically. And I had one of these extended antennas with a longer coax that continues all the way out to here. So I put my antenna out here on the tail boom, and this is another little 3D printed mount that's not my design, but I had printed some of these some time ago for a different airplane that I didn't use, and I had one in my parts box. I'll see if I can find the original files. I think they were on Thingiverse, but I'm not sure. And they were meant to glue to a flat surface, just to kind of snap the antenna into. And I made this other little piece down here that clips onto the tail boom, just to give this something flat to stick to. And then I have this, they're stuck together with some double-sided mounting tape. And I have this little plastic tie that fits in the groove that's already on here, intended for that. And it just kind of wraps around the tail boom, make sure everything is fixed a little bit more solidly, and it gives it enough friction to stay where you put it. So the idea is to fold it flat for storage, like so that when you kind of sit it on the bench or whatever, it doesn't get in the way. Just fold it flat, but obviously I want it vertical while I'm flying, so the goal is to just kind of spin that vertical when you fly, and then when you land with it vertical, it will just gladly fold under like that. And it doesn't really damage the antenna. These things are almost indestructible. But I've flown the airplane 3 times since putting this antenna setup on it, and 2 out of those 3 flights I flew with it flat like this. I forgot to turn it vertical. So that's the only downside to this. It's another thing to remember when you're getting everything ready and when you're about to take off and you're going through all your checks and getting stuff ready and situated, make sure everything's working right. I just kind of forget to do it. The first flight with it, I forgot about it and I flew with it flat. It worked fine, was not an issue. The second flight, I made it a point to remember it, stood it vertical, everything worked as expected. And then the last flight, which was the last video I posted actually, I did have a momentary fail-safe, but it was not until I flew back out in an area where I had trees blocking my signals and actually lost video at the same time. So it's not really a fault of this. Now, it might have powered through if I had it vertical, but I just need to make it a point to remember that, or either that or just quit turning it flat. Or, but yeah, it's just something to remember. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. The only thing I haven't mentioned yet, the flight controller is the same Maytech F405 WSE with ArduPilot. It currently has 4.4.0 beta. It's working fine. I've flown several versions of firmware on here since I put this board in here. Well, since I flew the airplane and started flying it, really. And they've all worked well. That's what's currently on it. I don't think I left out anything. One other thing I do want to mention, I got a question on one of my recent videos, is what motors am I using on here. These are the stock He-Wing branded motors, as you can see there. They're the He-Wing motors that came with the airplane kit. And they are 1404 3700 kV motors. Now, the props are not the stock props. These are Nazgul 4030s. The stock ones were fine. Efficiency was good, power was good. These were the closest I could find to the stock pitch and diameter with this mounting setup with the 2 Allen screws that bolt into the front. And I use these because they run smoother. It's the only reason. The stock props had a little bit of vibration for me, and I wasn't able to balance them as well as I'd like, so I picked up a set of these and it runs smooth, so that's what's on it. So I don't think we forgot anything that I wanted to talk about. Just getting the hatches and everything put back in place. So that's the look at my T1 Ranger. Questions, comments, put them below the video. Like I said, I'll try to have affiliate links to the products that I've purchased. I'll have links to the 3D printable files of my own design as well as others that I've used on here. And yeah, hopefully that covers everything and answers all the questions anyone might have had. So this ended up being about a 20-minute video now with the intro. We're at like 19 minutes of actual talking about the airplane. So we'll go ahead and cut it now. And questions, comments, put them below the video. I appreciate people using the links. If you don't want to use them, just search. Products are out there. And yeah, I guess we'll see you in the next videos. So that's this one. See you all later.